The full-scale hot war in Ukraine may be in full swing, but that has not diminished the intensity of the information war. The public in the West may not consider itself at war with Russia, but the ongoing assault of digital authoritarians on our institutions, systems, and media tell a different story. Today, we examine why companies can't ignore their responsibility to help make societies and democratic institutions more resilient against the malign influence of ill-intentioned actors. Welcome to Silicon Curtain. All our content is also available on popular podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Please like and subscribe to help new people find our fantastic speakers. And of course, if you enjoy the content, do consider supporting by becoming a patron. Olga Solovyeva is a social researcher with experience in higher education, business, and civil society organizations. Her areas of expertise include communication, technology, and society. She works on issues of data ethics, IT business regulation, and the relationship between the state and tech in Russia, and writes on these topics for academic, professional, and general audiences. And she's also worked on and co-authored many fantastic articles and blog pieces, and we will be putting links to those in the description of this video. Olga, welcome to the channel.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. And as we were discussing before I hit record, one of my sort of key focuses in my day job is marketing, tech, and of course, one of my key interests is the weaponization of social media, this kind of stuff. I think this is an absolutely fascinating conversation to be having. Well, let's start with political responsibility of tech businesses. You've written very eloquently on that. What has driven you to really research this area?
Well, Jonathan, my research started in the domain of online dating, surprisingly. So that was the first area which I hotspotted just to see how technology and society interact and what are the consequences. So I've been always interested in this dark side of the force, and particularly how technology changes our behavior and how technology, if you wish, allows companies, and marketing people, including them, to manipulate the decision making, and how enabling function of technology goes hand in hand with sometimes not very much desired consequences. So this is my background. And then from that, I've been looking at all around, studying disinformation, studying online learning, studying, again, online dating. And then eventually I came to the business school, where I discovered the angle which was not really talked about in either media or academic research. So this is particularly about the role of the organizations which develop this technology, right? So technology doesn't appear by itself. It comes with a company which produces, which employs people who are talk to each other, who set up principles for whatever they're doing, and they have their strategy for business development. So my question in the research I'm doing at the moment is, what is the responsibility of tech businesses, and particularly what is the responsibility in the political domain? Because again, this is a bit overlooked in academic research, which usually focuses on either the impact of technology on society or the deeds of the organization. So like, it sees in a way either only business perspective of it, the way it functions as an economic entity, or it looks at the technology, and like social media just appear, like Facebook doesn't have a CEO and IT people working on it.
And of course, to use that sort of paraphrase, with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. And yet we see many tech platforms have resisted for a long time, not just regulation and oversight, but they've also resisted taking responsibility for the impacts of their own technology. If we're going to be optimistic, we'll say that that is through sheer naivety, through inexperience. They're engineers who believe the glass is half full, and they just didn't plan for the impact their technologies would have. If we're going to be cynical, the technologies that have appeared over the last sort of 2 decades have become incredibly disruptive to all sorts of industries. And they've gone from being sort of challengers, innovative challengers, saving costs, saving time, creating all sorts of features to enable people to do things that weren't there before. They've almost morphed into the new monopolists, stifling innovation, stifling change, but seem not to want to acknowledge what they've become.
Yeah, well, I see a few things that underline this observation of yours, which is absolutely up to spot. So first, all businesses don't like the language of responsibility. This is a burden which comes to the idea of perceiving an or business organization as just doing business first, right? So when you think about it, the background of, I don't know, economic and business studies, they would define a company as a profit-seeking organization, right? And then the idea that this profit-seeking organization might also pay back to the society, it comes much later. It's a very recent invention. And there is a lot of like internal resistance within these organizations to either pay back and to see whether how they can be responsible and what they can do to contribute to the society. And then at the same time to maintain this profit. And throughout my research, I see that this dilemma is something that happens with all the organizations, including tech companies. I can't tell that, all of them, they're demons and they only want to monetize on our weaknesses and to get as much profit as they can, just driving on the worst things in us and gluing us to social media feeds, feeding disinformation, etc. But at the same time, this is the way how they can develop their own products and they can be responsible to their own employees, which is also part of the responsibility of the business. So they're balancing out in between, trying to be responsible and paying back to the society, and at the same time driving this profit. And tech industry has its own specifics. The problem is that the people who understand how tech works are people working in these companies, right? So they are the most of the experts. So there is a lot of difficulty in developing regulation and innovation in tech industry, in IT specifically. It just comes before the regulation, and it takes time to figure out how it's supposed to be working. And it's similar to other technologies which already exist. When cars first appeared, they didn't have the seat belt on sign, and didn't even have a seat belt. And then it took a long time to airplane industry to figure out the regulations to allow the safety of all the passengers and people using this technology. This is very similar. It's just we're so used as a society to the technology, to this innovation, and it will take some time to reflect on that and to see, was it really harmful? Or maybe you shouldn't smoke on board when you're, in an airplane. Maybe it's not good for everyone, but it was a norm back in 1960s and 1970s. So it takes time. IT industry is very specific because it reserves the talent there. And this talent must be responsible for driving this regulation. People doing regulation often don't have the expertise to develop this sort of regulation. And when we will start talking about authoritarian regimes, I would say why it is good that they don't have this expertise yet. And then this is business first, the attitude towards any business as a profit-generating machine, right? So these 4 pillars, they constitute the situation we're in. And I'm suggesting to think and elaborate on forces that can break this way of doing technology business.
And that's one of the key advantages, isn't it, of the tech sector, in that it's innovated into areas where there wasn't legislation, where there wasn't even an understanding of how to frame legislation, and it's been playing catch up, which means that in many areas, the legislation is relatively light touch, or has been in the early years of the tech boom. In particular, if you think of Google News and the fact that it's taking snippets of copyrighted content and reproducing them, but it's emerged into an area where there's a vacuum of legislation. It's been able to create that framework legislation that benefits it. And by the sheer force of its market power, it's dragged everybody else along with it. There have been various attempts, like in France, to curtail those sort of powers using much more sort of draconian copyright laws. But these have all sort of, I would say, failed against the juggernaut of technology. But is it also true to say that Google has been relatively benign? Social media platforms are perhaps a little less socially responsive, a little perhaps less aware of their position. I mean, it seems to me, working with Google, that Google has proactively implemented quite a lot of protections around first-party data, removing huge data sets from, say, Google Analytics, limiting the ability to join up data to identify, first-party individuals. Certainly not saying they're perfect. People would be outraged if I came out with that, and it's certainly not true. But the technology is also expanding very quickly, and we're also seeing GPT chat and other stuff coming on stream. Is it a kind of technology arms race that actually we will never win because legislation is slow to catch up? Technological change is speeding up almost exponentially, and actually the social culture that is required to evolve to handle new media also moves at an incredibly slow pace.
To be honest, I'm not pessimistic about this at the moment. For some reason, I believe that the new generations, people who are digital natives, people with more experience of technology, they might also receive a better education and might be a bit more mindful about where it's going on. And I think that we are just at the time when we're gonna reach some sort of a peak of a crisis with the technology and the disruptive technology, particularly, the social media fatigue, and then the usage of technology by authoritarian countries, including the disinformation, blocking access, and surveillance. So I believe that at some point we're just going, up the scale, and then the people would be just fed up with this, and probably some sort of an action would be growing, grassroots action against this company. At the same time, I believe that a lot depends on the leadership. So as I'm studying and I'm looking at different IT businesses, including Yandex, which is in Russia, I realize how much difference the leadership change happening over time in the company, from more liberal and value driven towards a bit more technocratic and profit seeking, how much discourse change is happening within the organization, and how drastically the way their products are served and then the sense making of employees is changing to reflect that. So if we take, let's say, Google on one hand, and then we have Facebook on another hand, we have very different sets of people who are doing these businesses. And I'm not a big fan of Mark Zuckerberg. And then there have been a lot of controversy behind his actions and explanations of how he says where the business is developing. And even though he is doing a lot of good, and there is a lot of research, a lot of charity work, the idea of social media and idea of Google and other products which Google is developing, it's still a little bit different, even though in points it abuses the same profit generating techniques. So I also know that Google does invest heavily in the privacy research in the company, and it's important. So believing that if we as civil society would have some sort of a force or an impact on the corporate architectural development, and if I will be able to suggest that each of the tech companies must have some sort of a corporate advocacy, some sort of a corporate counter force within its corporate governance that would be advocating for a fair, sustainable, and responsible technology development that would benefit the whole society, the society as a whole. So I believe that this would be, the future for the business model development. And I believe that there are instruments that can stimulate this, at least within the Western market. So, yeah.
And I think you make the case very sort of eloquently in the article that we're going to share, and that is that technology can be used for good, technology can be used for ill. And we've talked here about the sort of responsibility of the individuals and the business owners and engineers within the companies themselves. And that is to assume that these tech companies exist in a relatively benign environment. Certain people probably scream here, what about Julian Assange? What about this? What about that? What about, etc., with the classic whataboutism? But essentially, our governments aren't hell-bent on, let's say, internal genocide or repression of the population at the moment. So, there's this responsibility is right across the field. What happens in an authoritarian regime where these technologies arise or are imported? From societies like sort of, Japan, Europe, etc., but where the governments are absolutely intent on monitoring and controlling the behaviors of their populace.
Nothing good's really happening in these societies. And then authoritarians, they do have very clear set of instruments they utilize in order to make the tech producers compliant to what they need. And the main thing is legislation, right? So when the company operates in a certain jurisdictional area, they have to obey the rules in which they do operate and deliver their products and services. That's a common sense, right? And then the autocrats, they do take a great use of this, producing the laws and regulations that would oblige the organization to let them use the technology which is produced there. And this is when we come to the manipulation of information online. We've got the traffic rerouting, we've got blocked access to different information sources. And then the worst case is surveillance, which is operated both within the online system. This is when we talk about data handovers, personal data handovers, but we also have surveillance technology, which is just sort of for our safety around cities, which then is used, for instance, again in Russia, all these cameras distributed around Moscow, they use now to find conscripts and to send them to war in Ukraine. And unfortunately, that would be very problematic for many companies to disobey these laws. And the laws on disinformation, they are present in quite a few states. And then these laws on disinformation have a very different reading of what disinformation is. And then they oblige the companies to remove disinformation from the internet, cleansing the internet and space in a way, blocking the access of people to this information. And then they also punish civilians who use, for instance, social media. And then the social media would have to either remove their posts, and then when they post something, they are in danger because they want to circulate this. So the tool for sharing information, such as social media, suddenly becomes the tool of repression, the tool of information manipulation, and it also becomes the source for potentially limiting the freedom of a person who's using this source, just as, to exercise the freedom of speech. So it's problematic, and the legislation, as well as the, direct threats, which happen again in Russia when it came to Google, I believe in 2021, around the case of removing the Navalny's app, which was supposed to counteract the electoral fraud during the elections, right? But then eventually Google complied and they removed this app because the organization behind Alexei Navalny, FBK, it's considered extremist, right? So by doing so, Google would comply with the rules of the country where it operates, but at the same time, it empowered autocrats and it removed the only source of the opposition to rig the elections effectively, which is supposed to be flawed. And what can we do about it? That's a very good question.
And there's similar problems just in companies operating in China, don't they? Where at the moment, it's not quite got the same sort of, let's say, sort of relationship with the West. It's not quite so fractious, although there are tensions. But TikTok was recently banned I believe in the US and in the UK, there is strong advice about people not installing TikTok on work-related phones, or at least if someone's in the government employment or in any kind of sensitive industry, they've been advised not to use applications like that. So it's not just for internal repression and monitoring. There is also some fears that these applications platforms could be used in influence operations abroad or even espionage itself.
Yeah, well, my personal opinion about the TikTok case is might be a little bit different, because as far as I know, that TikTok was suggested, operating in America, suggested to land their servers in America, so they will store personal data of American users within the territory of the United States, and that basically is one of the ways to protect the personal data of them there. So it could be, I mean, I don't want to bring up a conspiracy here, but there must be other interests behind that, or some information which is publicly not available. The disinformation and influence campaigns, they are appearing all across social media, different social media, and there are different social medias which do exist in the world and can't really do much about it. And I believe that specialists on disinformation suggest that there is no efficient way of tackling it unless you engage in literacy campaigns and then you educate your public to be capable of distinguishing disinformation from a pure and a trustworthy information. And at the same time, yes, there should be a lot of pressure on internet companies for monitoring this when the population cannot be educated on the purposes. And that was the case of Myanmar and the case of Facebook, which was a terrifying thing, where hatred was spreading around Facebook, where Facebook is the equivalent of the internet because other services do not support Burman language. And then Facebook was the platform, and then it enhanced the circulation of disinformation used by malicious group to develop hatred and fuel hatred towards the Muslim minority. And that was a terrible case, and Facebook put a lot of input, but even they put a lot of input, there is not much they can actually do to control it, because this is what happens with any autocracy. As much as you try, and I think this is about the good versus evil, as much as you try, there would be always, some extra effort on the other side. So it's a continuous battle. So we can either just ban all social media and then stop this problem once and for all and return to email, or we need to invest more into the efforts of making people more literate, educated, etc. So yeah, I believe that could be one of the solutions, especially in problematic regimes. But the danger of autocrats spreading their technology towards more liberal countries in order to create a lot of damage. Again, disinformation campaigns, which were so perfectly mastered over the time by Russians, they've been mirrored by Americans and used again in the same domain of the information kind of warfare. So difficult to make any prognosis here.
So very much a point you made earlier about it being more to do with media literacy. So rather than fighting it with technological solutions, is ultimately the most effective thing to train people to spot disinformation, to be far more critical about the information they're receiving and question the sources of that information. Is that really the only sustainable way, and where our efforts should be focused, given that technological change is not going to go away, and malign actors are not going to go away? So let's empower people.
I think so, yes. But at the same time, the problem of disinformation and information manipulation it's not new, right? So it's been there for quite a while, and it's gonna stay. It's there to stay. So more people can be resistant to this sort of information flow, and more people can make their own minds, that would be great. The critics of this attitude, they would say that then you imply too much stress on users. So why do they have to do all the job? Where are all the watchdogs doing that? Of course, we need to have more people doing this, monitoring this, or train the AI to try to, to flag up some problematic areas. But in authoritarian countries, for this matter, I think that disinformation itself is not that much. I mean, it is a problem, but there is an additional condition of access to information, and particularly blocking content from online, removing it from being accessible in a certain area, a certain territory for certain number of internet users, and rerouting traffic, so it would be going elsewhere. So these together with disinformation, it creates a very specific information environment in which it is very difficult to make up your mind, no matter how literate you are, because you're just being very confused. So we've got the literacy campaigns, we've got the efforts in establishing democracy, we've got the set of principles under which we desire our societies to operate, and then we have technology, and then we have people working with the technology. And it would be good if they would all just come together and discuss the ways forward, because there are so many bright minds in all these tech companies. Let's take the big tech, but why each company of a big tech suffers silently and separately? They just can't unite. They just can't develop shared policies. They can't develop a shared set of ethical principles under which they, with the influence they have and with the amount of money they have and resources, much bigger than any sovereign state which exists at the moment, they could make much of a difference. But however, it's not happening. So yeah, if this sort of behavior could be encouraged, that would be great, even though it might sound a little bit naive and it doesn't fulfill the underlying economic logic behind that.
And I think people forget that the sort of massive social impact of technological change is not new. It's not just our age that's living through this for the first time. The introduction of the printing press was shortly in Europe followed by the burning of witches and hysteria around witchcraft. The introduction of radio went hand in hand with the rise of Nazi propaganda and the ability to control entire populations more efficiently and effectively, deal out terror. And the internet equally is accompanied by an extraordinary level of disinformation. Some of that, of course, is weaponized with specific actors. We know that quite a bit of COVID conspiracy theory was weaponized by the Russian government. That did blow up in their faces, because then it reduced trust in their own vaccine amongst the domestic population, and with tragic results. But these conspiracies may be launched or may be amplified by malign actors, but not everything is intentional. I mean, a lot of conspiracies online are entirely organic, and they will continue to arise like sort of, like bacteria on a sort of rich energy, high energy surface. Are there things technologically that can be done to sort of reduce it? Does fact checking work, for instance, or are we still in very much an experimental phase in dealing with these kind of phenomena?
Yep. You're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. And then the problem of disinformation, misinformation, organic disinformation, just people not being very educated on the topic and having vague opinions, which can be catch up and then circulated fairly widely. The problem with social media is not social media per se. This is the algorithm it works on, and this is the scale on which it works. So Facebook feed never ends. The recommendation system just tends to find you on YouTube. Recommendation system on YouTube will tend to feed you with more aggressive, progressive content as you start searching for something. So it does have a tendency towards drawing this algorithm towards more extremist content if you which not extremist, extreme content. If you start searching for something like, for example, healthy eating would eventually lead you towards not very healthy way of dieting and exhausting your body in order to follow the social ideals of people who are not very real, right? And if this would be a concern of people developing this technology, and then if we will make, again, technology a little bit more social responsible, so it would not try to get the most of its profit from the worst of us. That's what we discussed in the very beginning. If this algorithm will be a bit slower to take us there, or there would be no algorithm, or I'll have to search for things like that. I mean, in some cases, it's good, right? Spotify giving you fresh music each week. It's fantastic. I mean, they do know what I like. And I'm very glad for this. But when, again, I'm starting with searching something controversial on YouTube or watching this YouTube shorts, honestly, once I was just doing the experiment and procrastinating, and I was just watching these videos, and they do tend to cluster in the end and fuel me with the opinions of people, bloggers I didn't even know, or topics I'm not even interested, but they're so charged. They're so interesting in this case, and they got me, a person who'd been doing research on disinformation and internet and technology. They got me hooked, right? And I honestly don't know what to do with my own media consumption. That's why I deleted all these apps from my phone and tried to minimize the usage of it. So this is a matter of corporate greed exclusively. The corporations are greedy. They want more money made on the vulnerable users who use their technology, because this is the way it's monetized. And then this must be discussed by civil society groups, by journalists. It should be flagged up, and it should not be happening exactly what is happening with sugar products, right? We've got our breakfast cereal, which is not good for us, which is going to cause us diabetes at the age of 45. And we don't want this, but we have this because there is lobbying, and then there are processes, and then, this is how the society works. But with the technology, we must be a bit more cautious, because we see the harmful results of this.
And these algorithms, I mean, we've known for a long time, and anyone who's been in marketing has realized how powerful these algorithms are. And really, they go back a long way. I mean, far earlier than ChatGPT and all this stuff. I believe programmatic retargeting was introduced around 2010. So we're looking at a good sort of 14, 15 years where the systems, whether it be on desktop or mobile, they can tell what apps you're using, they can tell what you buy, where you've been, who you are. They can cross-triangulate between devices, so they know that you, Mr. Joe Bloggs, will move from a desktop onto a mobile. If that device, like a tablet, is shared, they will create personas of people in your household. So this targeting knows potentially far more about you, your behaviors, your family's behaviors, than you do yourself consciously. And this isn't new. It's existed for some considerable period of time. One of the worries, I think, you've highlighted in your article is that not only is it looking at these individual behaviors, it's also looking at key demographics. So could you tell us, are there demographics that are more vulnerable to these algorithms, and do they prey on particular segments of society more than others? In particular here, of course, we're talking about children and young adults who spend an inordinate amount of time and have a very, I would say, intimate relationship with these devices.
I think you said just everything super correctly, and I believe this is younger generations who are fairly vulnerable, and then then there are older generations who might not be that aware of how technology works, and then they might be tricked by different scams which are coming with the technology. But when we're talking about algorithms, I think it's important to note that, well, yes, they can drive our behavior, especially consumer behavior. So this is something which is done in a spontaneous way. And this is where you've got more expertise compared to me in terms of marketing. So I believe that many of these purchases, they can be impulsive purchases. And at the same time, if it has, if a person has initially intention, and then they've been bombarded with the targeted advertising suggesting a particular product to buy, that would be very efficient. And then people tend to overbuy, I mean, because of their own personal specifics, right? So they could be more prone, less prone, ready to take a loan, not ready to take a loan to buy these things they want. But at the same time, when we think about and when we discuss information, communication, and decision-making and opinion-making, I found research which suggests that even targeted information campaigns, they can't really be that influential, and they can't change the behavior of an individual, particularly on political topics and stuff like that. So yes, if you ask me personally, I am not a big fan of marketing, and I think that it would be nice if products would be sold in a little bit different way, but I am not a big fan of consumer society altogether. I think we own too much. I think we destroy our planet too much by fueling this extra excessive consumption. And then we tend to buy products which are not very high quality, which don't last, just to satisfy our needs. But this is my personal views, and it would be nice if marketing campaigning would be a bit aligned with the more sustainable values, and the products produced would be more sustainable. But that's another complex issue. If we're talking about changing attitudes online, I don't think that this would be, again, speaking about disinformation. If a person would be educated and would have a certain set of values, principles, within which this person resides as an individual, that would not be that easy just to make a switch from ultra left wing towards ultra right wing just by feeding and targeting with a specific information.
Well, that's how I describe my job to people at parties, is helping people to buy sort of crap they don't need, to fill space in their houses they don't have, and spend money they don't possess. But it's something we sort of need to tackle on many different levels from that sort of consumer point of view. And of course, protections for, companies that, I mean, I believe that there should be data protections. The company that is selling you stuff shouldn't be the one that knows everything about you. There needs to be some kind of division of responsibilities there, because otherwise what you've got now is digital monopolistic practices which actually stifle innovation, and in some ways are anti-capitalist in that they will prevent new and better innovations from emerging. But let's, in the time we've got, let's turn back to digital authoritarianism, because I think this topic of misinformation and disinformation, and whether that comes from the US, Europe, Russia, of course, and China, whoever it comes from, we are on the cusp of another major revolution, aren't we? And that is the AI revolution, where it'll be possible to produce deep fakes, where it'll be possible to take a range of propaganda narratives, and then using AI, create multiple profiles, multiple avatars, voices, tones. So the amount of disinformation could be both far more compelling and believable, but also the quantity of it could become exponential in the next couple of years, and include video material as well as sort of text and image material. So what are your feelings about how we can prepare ourselves or immunize ourselves ahead of the next revolution?
That's a very good question, and I can only speculate here, so I can not a few to tell for sure. The good thing I've learned from my research is that autocrats and people in governments, they usually are very slow to adjust to different technologies, to adopt technologies, and they don't understand how it works. They have a skewed idea, but they don't have an understanding of the technical implication of it. However, there are people who do have technical background and who can be there to get engaged with this immense propaganda, and AI creates a lot of prospect for this. How it will be used and how it will be abused, this is too difficult to speculate. Is it dangerous? Absolutely, it is dangerous. Is it needed? Are they retrogrades in a way? I believe so. I rather believe that they're technophobic still, and they have another interest. So from what I see and what I can interpret, that surveillance is much more interesting as a tool of a power control, because the media works in an understandable way, and then traditional media are under control in all these countries. Can we then use AI to create counter-propaganda? Well, possibly, but maybe we can use AI to detect these narratives. Maybe we can use AI to see how the filtering could work. Maybe this could be good, just to, if not ban, but think about some legislative acts that may restrain a particular usage of particular tools in particular countries. Well, probably not. Do you think that Chinese do not have their own AI developed and AI trained? They do have for a long time. Is it used for propaganda matters within the country at the moment? I'm not sure. So I believe that this could be a bit too effortful to engage with this and create that much of a big brother in one particular country. And understanding the logic of autocrats, they have a little bit different interest in mind. They want to preserve the power. That's the key interest, right? They probably are not interested in creating the world which mimics, the best dystopian books there. So must be we aware of this? Yes. What's going to be happening with AI? I have no clue. Do I use it myself? Yes. Will it be used for ill at a scale? Maybe. Should we keep an eye on it and then take action? Absolutely. Well, ChatGPT does not, at least it says that it doesn't really speak Russian yet. I don't know if it's a lie. Maybe we'll learn it fairly soon. So unfortunately, I can't give you any answer to this question, but I think we need to understand the demands of these people. And speaking about security of people, I believe that surveillance technology, which is given to autocrats easily for very good money, is a much more dangerous thing at the moment than any kind of information manipulation. I kind of give up on this direction at the moment.
And that's a really important point, I think, to end on, is focus on things we can influence, focus on things that perhaps don't get our attention, including civilian hardware for surveillance and so on. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there, but I think we've set the scene for a future conversation as AI unfolds, and see how that is used by authoritarian regimes, and indeed, potentially, for democracies, because not everything that happens in democracies is good and lovely either. Thank you so much, Olga. It's a huge pleasure speaking to you, and I hope to have the privilege to do so again.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. It was lovely chatting with you today. Thanks.